Hello and welcome to the United Lutheran Seminary webinar on the way to United Lutheran Seminary together. My name is Claire Burkat and I serve as the Bishop of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod, and I'm here tonight with our two presidents of the seminary at Gettysburg, Dr. Michael Cooper White, and the president of the seminary at Philadelphia, Dr. David Lose. And we're happy you're with us. We have more than 120 people registered, so please know that you're in good company tonight, and we're happy to be hosting you. I think that this is a good example of how the two campuses will be working together, because I happen to be on the Philadelphia campus this evening, and our two presidents are on the Gettysburg campus. So I think that's a good example of how we can make this work. Let me begin with a word of prayer as we begin our discussion tonight. God of ancient wisdom and God of new beginnings, we ask you to be present with us this evening as we discuss and reflect upon this new adventure, as we discern how to equip your people for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ in this century. We thank you for the more than 300 years of theological education represented by the Lutheran Seminary at Gettysburg and the Lutheran Seminary at Philadelphia, and for the immeasurable ways you have raised up leaders for the proclamation of the gospel in word and sacrament and word and service. Many leaders who are joining in our conversation and listening this evening. So be with us tonight as you are with us always. Amen.
Amen.
So we were together, I forget when, a few months ago, and I am pleased to report that a lot has been going on. I'm thrilled as a member of the board and a member of the search committee that we are on schedule in many of the ways that we're moving along. So I'd like to invite our presidents to get us started this evening by giving us kind of an update on what's happening, what are the key highlights of the progress we've made as United Lutheran Seminary. Would you do that, please?
Good evening, Bishop Burkat, and good evening, the rest of you. I too want to add my thanks for taking time ahead of the basketball game coming up later to focus on more important matters. About a month ago, I said to a group I was sitting with, it feels to me like we have come to the point that a ship or an airliner comes to crossing the ocean. We no longer have enough fuel to get back to our starting point. In other words, United Lutheran Seminary will launch on July 1st of 2017. We have a name, we have approved governing documents, we have a faculty. Most of the administrative staff positions now have been filled. We have students, wonderful students, many of whom will be carrying forward from the two existing schools, and also a goodly number now of prospects and students who are enrolling who will be joining us this fall. We have a wonderful board, and Bishop Burkat, you are a member of that and can testify to that. Led by the deans, the new faculty has developed a very exciting curriculum. We have received approval in just recent weeks from both our accrediting agencies for the consolidation, as well as the Department of Education of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have a plan for resource allocation. We are nearing finalizing a budget, which will be presented to the board later this month. We have a plan for campus management on both locations and key policy documents for the board's approval. That sounds like a school ready for launch, does it not?
Yes, it does. So let's start with the questions, and for our listening audience, I think we're going to do the questions that were sent in. There were a lot of them, but we've tried to bundle them into different categories. And then we want to have some time for those of you who are viewing to send your questions in. So we'll do that, and we'll do this first part with the questions that were sent in already, and then we'll move to some questions from those who are listening at home. So the first question I have is the long-range plan for United Lutheran Seminary to continue to make use of both campuses, and will students take courses at both campuses as residents?
So two parts to that question. The first part is that we are planning for the foreseeable future to really be able to take advantage of two distinct locations and two historic locations and work and make it possible for students to study at either. The second part is about whether students will be required to take courses in both places. At this point, we have not made the decision to require it, but will encourage it, which means that most of the travel back and forth when there needs to be travel will be staff or faculty. It may be that students want to take a course in either location, and we hope that's true. But right now, we feel so incredibly fortunate that we have two fantastic campuses, both of which are in the process of trying to redevelop themselves or assess the need or size or scope of those. The Philadelphia campus is a great example. We've probably used a fraction of the whole campus and have some possibilities to develop some of that in exciting ways in partnerships with the community around us. But that is the plan so far, and we feel really fortunate to have those two distinct and historic opportunities for our students.
Well, one of the questions that is on a lot of people's mind is what's the status of the search for the new United Lutheran Seminary president? So I think I'd like to jump in and take a time with that. I'm on the search committee, and what I can say is that we have been very impressed by the caliber of the candidates who we reviewed, and we hope at the board meeting this month, the end of this month, to present a new president to the board. So I think that's all I will say at this time as it rolls out, but I'm excited, and I think we will know certainly by the beginning of May, but the end of this month, we should have the name of our new president. Okay, all right, so that's a good question. Let's see, here's one. What efforts are you making to communicate and genuinely accept feedback from alumni and current students? It seems that sometimes decisions have been made on the board level without seeking the views and being open to feedback from others. I worry that alumni and others are just being told to blindly support this effort.
I'll take a start with that one. Presidents and deans have been very attentive to attending each one of our alumni council meetings. We've been holding frequent meetings with students to try to keep them informed and also to gain their input. Friday of this past week, students from Philadelphia came here to Gettysburg, student association leaders from both schools. And I'm told by the end of the day, they had made good progress in drafting a constitution, bylaws for the new student association. The presidential search process you mentioned, the leader of that is an alum, and students and faculty and staff from both campuses, as well as two bishops. Actually, on that presidential search committee, there are only a couple of board members, so board members have been in the minority. The Gettysburg advancement staff over the course of the past year has visited 30 conference gatherings of clergy, and of course here in Region 7 and 8, the majority of clergy serving who are in those conferences are alums of one school or the other. And those have been wonderful opportunities to get feedback, to listen to ideas. And of course, we have the website, New School of Theology, which we're constantly monitoring, where people can weigh in with their suggestions, their questions. And the webinar a few weeks ago, along with this one tonight, are other opportunities for people to share their perspectives.
Thank you. Do you want to weigh in, David?
You know, I just want to say briefly, I think it's really important to distinguish between different kinds of decisions. Some really are reserved for the board, the sensitivity of the nature of those decisions, or sometimes confidentiality around personnel. Those aren't things we can work out in public, but other kinds of decisions have been very much vetted and shifted and changed as we've received feedback. Some of the work that led to this initiative to bring the two schools into a new partnership into one school really resulted from some pretty extensive listening each of us had done in different strategic planning settings, and listening to a broad array of our constituents saying, you know, we need this church to change, to be more responsive to the culture we're in, and that deeply influenced the curriculum, as well as we need models for what productive, healthy change looks like when you recognize a change setting. And we've tried to do this work in a way that not only furthers the mission of the school, but we've tried to do as much of it above the table so that others could watch and learn from both our successes and our mistakes as they begin to think about what kinds of new configurations, whether it's of congregations or synods or camps. So I think it's just, as a leader, you recognize some information has to be held more closely because of the sensitivity and its impact on people's lives, and other parts can be shared really openly. We've tried to do that, and we've been really grateful both for the support and also the questions, and sometimes very critical questions that we've heard that have very much shaped the way we've moved forward over the last 18 months.
Well, I have to add also that the bishops of Region 7, and I'm sure also Region 8, have been in conversation with mostly our rostered leaders and in our conference gatherings, and we've been doing this now for more than a year. So we're getting feedback as well, but it's not as exactly posted, but we give feedback. We've been giving feedback along the way. I'm going to jump into another one I know people are interested in knowing about. How many of the faculty and staff will be part-time and how many full-time? You know that there's been some changes made in faculty.
United Lutheran Seminary's initial faculty will be 21 individuals. That counts the teaching faculty, the president, and the librarian, who typically in an academic institution is also granted faculty status. 7 of those 21 will be full-time. I'm sorry, 7 will be part-time. 14 will be full-time.
Wow.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Could you provide the latest data on admissions, both church-wide and for the combined entities?
Yeah, last year, as folks may remember, both campuses saw a very large increase in the number of students that were coming. Some of that we think may have been moving toward greater financial aid, although that news got out a little late. We heard from a lot of students they were interested in seeing what was happening, how an institution changes. We've added a distributed learning that made it possible for some folks who could not relocate. And so we saw a 50% jump at both campuses in MDiv applications and more than a third in enrollment as a whole. Going into this new year, we were, of course, really both eager and a little anxious to see how that bore out. And so far, the Gettysburg campus is on target to have equally strong admissions this year, which is very good news. It doesn't feel like just a blip, but it really is a trend as we're able to attract more students through new programs and financial aid. And the Philly campus seems actually to be increasing again, and so some greater strength. So last year was in a lot of ways a record-setting year, and we're glad to report it wasn't an anomaly, but this year may even be stronger. So knowing the church's need for leaders, that really is a huge validation of the staff that are working so hard and this initiative to make it more possible for more people to enter into leadership.
Well, as a bishop, I'd like to let people know that since the full tuition was announced, we had 30 inquiries just in our synod alone. Now, I realize that our synod is on the campus of the seminary at Philadelphia, but 15 are actually, of the 30, are planning and desiring to go to school in the fall. And most of those are residential students. I thought they would be mainly commuters, but not so much. And so I'm kind of thinking this new school will have 15 synods, 7 synods from Region 7, 8 synods from Region 8. And if every single synod raised up 2 or 3 candidates every year and made that their business to be looking for that, we could easily have 30, 40, 50 students every single year. And so that's what I'm hoping for. But people do wait till the last minute, I will say that. We've had to kind of move some of our entrance policies back a little bit because people are discerning and they have some other back work they need to do before they're entranced.
I want to offer too a quick shout out of appreciation to the synods for their support and for the scholarships they've created, and to our churchwide partners in the Fund for Leader Scholarship, which attracted some additional donor gifts and has made it possible for more students to compete and to be considered for those scholarships. So the work we do is in partnership and we celebrate the growth, but I also just want to recognize we've got a lot of folks right now in the church working on this issue, and I'm really, really grateful for them.
Okay, good. Here's another one. Will the seminary consider hosting more ecumenical chapel services, as there are students of various denominations, Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopal, Baptist, AME, Kojic, etc.? That's our treasure is our ecumenical partnerships, but I think this is a worship question, the variety of worship. So,
as with many questions these days, Bishop Burkat, you and others can appreciate that David and I are having to say they rather than we, because we will not be part of the future other than that we'll be cheerleaders and generous supporters in every way we can. So we can't fully answer for our successor, but we also can't imagine you and the other search committee members not being attuned to the nature of these two schools, to their current as well as their historic ecumenical commitments. And we have now designated for the coming academic year deans of the chapel. Mark Oldenburg will continue as dean of the chapel at Gettysburg, and Michael Krantz, thank you, senior moment. Dr. Michael Krantz will be dean of the chapel at Philadelphia, and they both, I think we can guarantee, will lead that worship life of the chapel in as broad and rich and diverse and ecumenical spirit as possible.
well, speaking of diversity, here's another question that I think fits in right well there. Can ULS make it a priority to call a woman of color when a faculty position opens?
The ULS board and administration and faculties will absolutely be able to define positions and target searches. I know the value of diversity in a faculty. We see that playing out all of the time on our campuses, especially in faculty and in student bodies. And so I have no doubt of, again, this is anticipating where the school that we will not be a part of is going, but I have no doubt of that commitment, and there's certainly the mechanisms that make that easier to identify and lift up diversity as a real value added in our candidates, absolutely.
Oh, good. That sounds good. Here's one. I'm curious as to the feedback from the LTSG alumni, and for that matter, the LTSP alumni. What kind of feedback have you been getting? We might have covered this a little bit, but I think that it would be good. We talked about other constituents and stakeholders, but specifically the alumni, because we have a long history in both schools.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge to gauge, given the fact we have several thousand living alumni, but I would characterize it as generally very positive and encouraging. Obviously, there's a whole range from those who say, finally, this is happening. Should have happened 100 or 50 years ago. Even some of our alums remember chapters as when I was a student at Gettysburg Seminary, where there was serious consideration of bringing Philadelphia and Gettysburg together, and where Donald Higas had served for 7 years as presidents of both. They backed away at that time. So I think for many alums, there's a sense this is the right thing to do. It may be overdue. On the other end of the spectrum, there are some who are challenged by this, I think finding it difficult to embrace the reality there will no longer be a seminary by the name of Gettysburg or a seminary by the name of Philadelphia. That tends to be the case. We've discovered more, I think, among more recent alums who understandably are very closely tied to current faculty and staff and deeply concerned about the disruption in the lives of our colleagues. But in general, the word we're hearing, I mentioned our advancement staff having made 30 conference visits, is one of encouragement. We've also heard from a number of places, pastors, for example, saying, you know, my congregation really is no longer viable on its own. We need to discover new ways of creative ministry, or we can flourish by joining with others, and this gives us courage to do that. There's a range. I would characterize it as generally positive and supportive. And from the Gettysburg perspective, I suppose one indicator is the fact that our alumni giving this year to the annual fund is double what it has been the past couple of years.
That reminds me, I have to write my check.
To both seminary, no.
And I'm reminding our listening audience, write your check. Okay, so here's, you can thank me later. Okay, here's a couple of more specific questions. Is it true that instruction in the Lutheran confessions will be optional for students preparing for word and sacrament ministry in Lutheran churches? I don't know where that came from, but hey, I think we need to address it.
No, sorry.
Because it is in the ordination rite and in the consecration rite.
It is not optional. I think whenever you change a curriculum, there's a lot of nervousness about the changes that are happening. And one of the really exciting elements that the deans and the faculty have worked very hard on is moving toward a competency-based curriculum, where the way you gauge someone's readiness to graduate and move into church leadership is not simply checking off courses that have been passed, but really through those courses and other experiences, trying to equip leaders with a certain set of skills and competencies. And sometimes when we start talking about competencies in different areas, we don't always list the required courses or the courses that build that. And so I think people don't hear a focus on church history or systematics or New Testament or confessions and assume that's getting left behind. But in fact, those core theological disciplines, classical disciplines will be a part of what prepares people then to exercise leadership. And the question being, how does this learning play itself out in the leading of a congregation to health and vibrancy and mission? So a lot of those key concerns or things that we've loved so much will absolutely be there, but we're going to put them in conversation with each other and marshal them to train people to respond to the church in the world that we're actually in, and look forward to that.
So here's a question on those things we love and don't want to give up. The latest rumor I've heard, now this is not me saying it, I'm just reading the questions. The latest rumor I've heard is that the LTSG bookstore may not be retained. Has a decision been made regarding the store closing or remaining open? And please comment beyond yes, a decision has been made. We want specificity.
Actually, I better take that one, I guess.
Yeah.
We're sitting right above it here on the Gettysburg campus in Valentine Hall. Actually, a final decision has not been made in that regard. What I can say is that the board of United Lutheran Seminary is insisting on a balanced budget. We have been heavily subsidizing the bookstore in recent years, since so many book sales now go out to Amazon and other sources. We cannot continue to do that. The Gettysburg Times this past week reported on the closure of a bookstore right down on the square downtown that had been owned by the same couple for 40 years. And they were quoted in the paper too as saying, we simply cannot compete with Amazon. At the same time, we recognize that things like bookstores are community gathering points, and so that's being weighed along with all other factors. I expect we will have a final decision here in the next few weeks.
There are going to be a number of issues like that come up, and when people ask them, we know it's not simply nostalgia, wanting to keep things the way they were when whoever's asking it was in school. It also, I think, is a real recognition of certain places, persons, locales being important in one's overall formation. And I think what's important to recognize is the new school will be absolutely committed to and interested in creating those spaces and opportunities for formation. They may not always be the same, but we will be attending to those opportunities. No one's going to make the case that the bookstore was foundational to their being able to lead a congregation. But having a place to meet people and talk and interact is. And so as things change, however they may play out, the leaders of the school will constantly be looking for those places of interchange of ideas and a chance to have fellowship and grow and mature in those informal ways as well as the formal class settings.
So at this time, I'd like to ask our audience, our listening participants, to send in questions. And we have a couple that have just started, so I'll get started with that. And then this would be the time for those of you who are watching. This is an important question. I think that needs to be addressed. What happens to the urban program at Philly? I think that, to me, that's obviously the Urban Theological Institute. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Each of the schools has made excellent use of its context in thinking about the constituencies it serves. At Gettysburg, that's been the Town and Country Church Institute. One of the ways that we've reflected the context here. At Philly, it's been the Urban Theological Institute. And both of those programs will not only continue, but will continue in ways that are even stronger. That is, the healthier the overall seminary picture is, the more support we can lend to that. And I want to, again, another shout out of the variety of constituencies that I relate to in my role at Philadelphia. It's probably the advisory committee of the Urban Theological Institute that has been unfailingly, unwaveringly the most supportive. Recognizing that the change could very well affect them, hearing some of the assurances and plans, but they have just recognized the need to be strong and have so much appreciated our commitment to be a real presence in the city of Philly and to continue to do that, just as we'll continue to be a presence in Gettysburg and Adams County. So that's all to the good. The work we're doing really creates the possibility for the various partnerships we've had to grow and flourish, and that's a big part of why we're doing this work.
Well, I'd like to just say that as the co-convener of the Religious Leaders Council of Philadelphia, of Greater Philadelphia, the religious leaders from a variety of ecumenical and interfaith faith communities are very supportive of the seminary. They actually asked me to have 2 interfaith programs here at the seminary at Philadelphia. And it's interestingly, the historic Black churches in Philadelphia call this school Lutheran. So they won't have to change too much with the campuses. They just call it Lutheran. So I think that one would stick as well. So we're really moving with some very, very good community relations. And one of the reasons I think though they like this campus is beautiful. The Brosman Center is wonderful for events and conferences, but also free parking in the city of Philadelphia and public transportation. So we're in a good place there. We have some questions. Yeah.
Could I just add to that? I think there's been a common misperception that Gettysburg hasn't prepared people for urban ministry and doesn't have an urban context. Region 8 just happens to include these little cities like Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And we've had internships and contextual ed experiences in those places all along. And also, again, as President Lose was saying, the Town and Country Church Institute, I think, is going to be strengthened. It's going to have the rich resources of all of those town and country settings in Region 7 as well as Region 8. And if you have not received it yet, look for the April edition of Living Lutheran magazine, which features rural ministry and 2 recent Gettysburg Seminary grads of the Town and Country Church Institute working in West Virginia parishes.
And I have to say, in the southeastern Pennsylvania city, we have several very fine Gettysburg graduates serving the city of Philadelphia and other regions. So absolutely, we're preparing students to go anywhere, right? Absolutely. And okay, so here's some more. This is a good one. How will ULS face some of the large social and political issues with theological implications? We're living that right now, that's for sure. Will the new school be as outspoken as its predecessors?
Huh.
Well, what does that mean?
Ah,
I think we're outspoken. Okay, but anyway, the large social and political issues with theological, it's a public church, right? So, we got to learn how to do this.
it is a public church, and I think both these schools have been known for the fullness of the gospel and the fact that the gospel addresses all of life, including the pressing, vexing social issues. I think we both have been known for leadership in ministries of social justice on the part of our graduates. I can't imagine, again, that not being further fortified by our coming together and speaking with a unified voice, a more powerful voice, just given the fact we're going to be one of the larger schools in theological education.
I think seminaries play a variety of roles in relation to the question that was asked. The seminary itself will at times take a stand on particular issues, or individual faculty members may take a stand or contribute resources. And that's an appropriate expression of its vocation as a seminary. We're training our students and graduates to think theologically about these issues and to help their congregations to do the same. And I think that's vitally important. Sometimes it's assumed, but we're not training people to support one or another political ideology, but really to think about that in relation to the gospel and the biblical witness, and help their people think theologically. We're also training them to think pastorally, and a big part of pastorally is meeting people where they are and cultivating safe spaces for conversation. One of the things I've been struck by in the last 6 months or year especially is how few opportunities there are for safe and mature conversation, and how few role models there are right now for how to interact with people who differ with you. And one of the things this last election betrayed, of course, or revealed so starkly, was the tremendous gulfs that people are experiencing between where they are, or their elected officials are, or where their neighbors are. And churches are one of the last places where you are collecting people from across economic and political backgrounds. They're not always as ethnically as diverse as we would hope, but they often are very politically diverse and economically diverse. And we have an opportunity to help people to speak together. So there is an advocacy role and taking stances. There's also a different, and in some ways a more difficult, pastoral role, which is connecting with people where they are and making it possible for them to hear each other and listen to each other in light of our shared faith and hope in the gospel.
You know, just recently we had at the seminary here at Philadelphia campus in the Brosman Center an interfaith gathering of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim clergy. And we did it together, and there were more than 180 who came because we needed help as leaders, dealing with our own, pastoring ourselves, supporting ourselves, and also as we lead, to kind of ramp down some of the reactivity, and then in order to be able to lead our congregations, because all congregations have divisions, political divisions, and we need to find ways to do it and move us forward. And actually last week in my advocacy visits on the Hill, in Capitol Hill, I made it a point every time I visited with one of our Congress people or senators to say, please, please work in a bipartisan way. The people of America are asking you to do this. We're trying to do it on a church level, and we're asking you to do it for the sake of the whole country. We need to do that. So that's where we need to go more than ever.
Bishop Burkat, I'd like to break in here with just a personal request for prayers on the part of all our participants. Word came today that one of the most influential Gettysburg faculty of my student generation was Robert Jensen. Bob Jensen was one who early spoke out against the Vietnam War, was a champion for civil rights, and Dr. Jensen has gone into hospice and is in his final days. So I know the Gettysburg alums and many others would want that word and would want to join us in prayers for him and his family.
Well, why don't I pray now so that we don't have to come back to it, okay?
Please.
And so, Lord, we bless and thank you for the life and witness and courage and great wisdom of Dr. Robert Jensen. And we ask you to be with him, give him the peace that passes understanding, and be with his family now in this very, very holy time, this liminal time between life and death, between this earthly existence and the eternal home that you have prepared for him. And we ask you to guide him and bless him and be and comfort all those who knew him and loved him and who learned from him. We thank you for his incredible courage and his life and his witness. No one can ever count except you, Lord, how many lives were changed, how many people have been brought into a life-saving relationship with you through the witness of so many of our wonderful faculty over the years. We can all name them, but especially tonight for our brother, Robert Jensen. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm just going to go back to some of our questions coming in. Here's a good one.
Read that.
Yeah. Can you read it? I didn't know you. I thought this was a surprise. You can read these questions? Oh, that's.
One popped up
Oh,
there.
I thought I was surprising you. Okay, what are the current plans regarding the sale of properties or buildings on both campuses?
I'll try to do it super quick on the Philly campus. For the last better part of a year, we've engaged 3 partners to help us think about using the perimeter of the campus in a way that stewards those resources more effectively for the mission of the school. One has helped us engage our community neighbors, and we've had tremendous conversations and support from the community and a lot of feedback on what they would like to see so that the campus, they have, of course, a vested interest in the seminary continuing and whatever happens there because it affects them regularly. And we've had tremendous support, great conversation. That feedback's really influenced the plans. The other 2 groups that we've worked with, one is an architectural group that has worked with educational institutions before and giving us a range of options of how we might use some of the surplus property, perimeter property. And the third is a group of attorneys that specialize in zoning and help us in our relationship with the city of Philly. We have some pretty interesting, exciting plans that the community feels very good about. We want to continue to be a good neighbor and are in the process of entertaining bids for a master developer that could help us move this forward. I'm guessing it's going to be anywhere from a 2 to 6 or 7 year timeline that this will take place over. And the projections at this point is that the revenue generated from that work could pay off the remaining debt on the Brossman Center and other buildings that have been a significant part of our budget in recent years as the carrying costs, as well as replenish the endowment and put ULS in a really strong position going forward. So that work's ongoing. Happy to continue to have feedback. That's another place we've heard a lot of opinions and have been really grateful for them. And the plans we've seen so far, although very preliminary, are really promising and quite exciting.
The Gettysburg campus, for those who don't know it, is a 52-acre parcel of land in a very historic place. And while the potential for development here is probably not quite as dramatic as at Philadelphia, in the next few years, we too are in conversation with a number of groups about some possibilities on this campus. I think it's fair to say that it's highly probable within a decade, both campuses will look significantly different than they do today. And as David was saying, the board is really committed to better stewarding these campuses so they will be less costly and we can continue to offer those generous full scholarships to full-time students and be the best stewards possible of these rich resources entrusted to us.
So here are 2 new student and alumni questions. One person said, you mentioned that the Student Association is working toward a new constitution. What else are students experiencing in anticipation of the new school? And then I'm going to just add this other one to it. There are currently 2 alumni councils. Will they be combined? So if you could kind of handle both of those, that would be helpful.
In addition to the student groups meeting, the student government groups meeting, and that's gone really well and been very encouraging. each of us has met with our student bodies at a variety of times and pretty regularly to give updates on the work that we're doing to become United Lutheran, to give updates on the curriculum, and at each of those times has received feedback and fed that back to the groups working, which has been really helpful. It's a time of disruption for faculty and staff, especially, also for students. I've been really very impressed and almost taken by the spirit of our students. And they're recognizing that they're watching something that doesn't happen that often as institutions of the church proactively respond and try to change themselves through creativity and great effort to be more responsive, more faithful to the gospel. So I think a lot of folks, even though they may have, particularly those who joined as one school and will graduate as another, even though it's turbulent, there's a lot of excitement, and it's generated a lot of great conversations. The Alumni Council is a really interesting question. I don't know that that's settled, nor that it has to be. They are also in conversation with each other and are thinking about how they will draw students, alumni, into the United Lutheran kind of family of graduates. But they also recognize there are some distinctive events that have been really important to the distinctive campus alumni, and are thinking through how to recognize that as well. I don't think trying to build a strong United alumni means that it has to be a diminishment of either of the sense of place for our current alumni that have come from these two schools. So that's I think a really interesting conversation, and the people leading it are creative and careful and caring, and I'm interested in, as an alum, we're both alums of our distinctive schools, interested in seeing where that goes.
And to have an effective alumni association, you need staff support. I mentioned earlier, we're well along in filling staff positions, and within our advancement office, there's already a decision. A full-time director of alumni relations is one position, and there probably will be even a second partial or combined position to give those groups the kind of support they need. It's been interesting. Most of the documents being generated need to be approved by the board of directors ultimately, faculty, student, employee handbooks, but the constitutions of the student association and the alumni associations do not. In other words, those entities are in charge of their own lives and will make their own decisions for their organizations moving forward. But I think it's pretty clear the student association wants to be one student association, seeing themselves as one student body on both campuses, and it's in the hands of the alumni councils whether and when they would come together.
Well, we have several more questions, but I wanted to get these two in so that we don't wait till the last minute. Discuss how donors can support the full tuition initiative.
Send checks or use your credit cards.
Yeah, or scan it.
Yeah, we really will depend on, another question has been raised, how can you do this? How can any school offer full tuition scholarships? It's first of all important to recognize we're not going from 0 to 100% here. On average, we had both been at 50 to 60% scholarshiping for the last several years. So we're closing a gap, but in order to continue closing that gap, and in order to provide more scholarships as more students will come, we're going to need much more generous response from more donors, individual donors, congregations, and all of us across the board.
I'm grateful for the question. You know, seminary education for a very long time in this church's history was not a financial burden to those who came to study and then went out to lead congregations. Theological education was for a long time considered a gift of the church. At times that was a national church body that fully funded seminaries. At other times it was congregations who regularly provided full tuition scholarships. And somewhere along the way that shifted, and the more and more of the tuition responsibility fell onto students. Even though seminaries have kept the tuition remarkably low compared to any other sector in higher education, we still recognize that's a challenge, and it's keeping some people from ministry. And so that's where the initiative comes from. We hope other schools will move in that direction, but we'll only be able to do that if individuals and congregations recognize that they don't have an interest only when one of their students, one of their own members goes to seminary, but we all have a vested interest in seminaries flourishing and creating leaders. So again, I'm just grateful for the question because it gives us a chance to talk about something that's so important and a real sense of partnership we have with the rest of the church.
So this is a piggyback on that one. So how can congregations, because we have not been doing this well either for the last 20 years, I would say, how can congregations support the new seminary? What are some good ideas? Let's think of some new ideas.
Yeah, there are a couple things that come immediately to mind. One, and again, I want to recognize some congregations have been remarkably faithful with gifts of $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 a year. Some have endowments and earmark a portion of that for seminary education. That's been wonderful. Congregations can do a couple things that would be remarkably important. One is to pray for the students, the faculty, and the staff on a regular occasion for its own spiritual value, but also to lift the mission of seminaries up in the minds of congregations. A lot of people don't ever think about seminaries. If you ask them where their pastor came from, they'll name the last church that pastor served, and that's understandable. So just to pray for us, we feel that, we appreciate that, and it also allows people to think about the role of seminaries, to invite us to your congregation on a seminary day to find a faculty, staff, student to come visit to talk about seminary education, to make a commitment in your budget. If every congregation in regions 7 and 8 took $20 from each offering plate weekly, that's about $1,000 a year, but to break it down, that's $20 per offering plate. And we're to set that aside for seminary education. We would be well on our way to be able to fund this full tuition scholarship for years into the future. To make that a part of the budget, though, a discipline, that the occasional would be wonderful. And then to introduce some of our advancement people to persons of means and commitment in your congregations. Pastors sometimes get nervous about that. They think, well, then they might not give as much to the church. They'll give it to the seminary. And what I found across the board is that as a person of means already is giving to multiple places, and as they get excited about and understand the role of seminaries, they actually often appreciate their pastors and their local congregations even more. And so a willingness to introduce us to people who might have a heart and a capacity for supporting the seminary mission would also be wonderful. So there are a variety of ways, and again, a place where if you have ideas, send them to us. We'll be very glad to talk about how we can really move into a much more partnered, shared sense of responsibility for educating the leaders of the church.
Well, while we're talking, people are sending their ideas, and they're coming up on the screen. So I'd like to share a couple of those with us. Okay, endowed scholarships, $30,000, $30,000 for a scholarship. Sponsor a student, $300,000 is a fully endowed scholarship. I don't know what that means because I'm just trying to do the math. But I like this one. Celebrate your pastors, and I might add your deacon's anniversary of ordination or consecration by making a gift to ULS. I think that's an interesting way we can start celebrating, and you know, we all have enough plaques. Maybe we need some more gifts in honor of ordination and consecration. Oh, wait, wait a minute, here's some more. This person's on a roll. Okay, invite seminarians to come and preach. I have to say, my very first sermon ever, I hadn't even taken a homiletics course. I did nothing. And I was, because the seminary said, it's a women's day, and we have a woman at the seminary. Why don't you go and preach? And I know this isn't part of our webinar, but I have to tell the story. So I thought, well, where is this church? Oh, it's 30 miles away from Philadelphia. Oh, it's probably a small country parish, right? It was New Hanover Lutheran Church, and I had to, walk up the stairs to get to the pulpit. That was my first time preaching ever. So yes, I think people are love to have seminarians, so we should send them on the road. I love that idea. I know they are, but we could do more.
Yep.
All right, so let's move along here. I'm looking at some of these. Any feedback from the ELCA leadership, if that's us, I should say, any feedback from churchwide leadership on the new venture? What is Bishop Eaton saying?
We just received a video clip about 3 or 4 minutes a week ago that Bishop Eaton was very gracious to record. It might be used at some of the synod assemblies, kind of cheerleader piece in which she was encouraging and inviting others to pray for United Lutheran Seminary, along with all of the seminaries of the church. We have been encouraged by the response of our churchwide partners. I mentioned earlier the new bylaws and so on. Those all have to be approved by the Church Council of the ELCA. They have now been approved, and of course, we have always at our side when the board meets Dr. Jonathan Stranjord, Program Director for Seminaries, who's been in his post more than 18 years, and I know worked closely, Bishop Burkat, with the presidential search process. The presidential candidate has to be in consultation, or the search committee rather, has to be in consultation with the presiding bishop's office in the selection of a seminary president. And I understand that has occurred as well.
Absolutely. I can attest to that. Okay, so here's an important question. What kind of educational opportunities do you think will exist for lay people at the new school? I'm thinking of maybe not degree programs, or maybe a prerequisite to a degree program, or maybe certificate programs, or what? That's a new field.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really exciting shifts in our imagination about what seminaries are. For a very long time, we thought of them almost entirely as sort of pastor factories. And of course, we'll continue to graduate pastors for our congregations. In recent years, there's been other kinds of degrees for people wanting to connect their faith and their professional lives. We've done more and more lifelong learning and continuing education for our rostered leaders now, recognizing that as the culture changes, their own skill sets need to change and develop. And I think the area where we have ventured into somewhat, but have room to grow, really is to think about ourselves, not simply in terms as a seminary, but really as a center for theological learning. And so whether that's podcasts or making classes available by video or live stream, whether it's partnering with congregations so that faculty could go to a region that we're not located in, whether it's upstate New York or West Virginia, and spend a weekend or a week at different times. I think those kinds of partnerships are going to be vital, because seminaries really need to be resources to the whole of the church and to our strengthening congregations across the board. So lay education is one of those places where we've each had particular events, whether centered around the Reformation or other kinds of activities, but a lot of room for growth, and I think really, really exciting.
One of the first hires made was a director of lifelong learning and continuing and lay education. Michelle Huth has been doing that work already for both seminaries with our theological education for youth for over a decade in a very part-time position. Now that will be a full-time position dedicated to further strengthen our work in that area.
So here's something that we do need to wrap up, but these are interesting questions. You know, when people ask me about two campuses, there's a whole few generations that think of it only in the terms of the property and not all the other ways in which we could be doing theological education. So say a word about how will technology help make ULS possible? In what ways will it expand? This is an important one. Are there buses or vehicles to shuttle people between campuses? Or maybe we'll build a railroad, I don't know. And is there a United Lutheran Seminary website? So let's just kind of broaden our understanding that it's not just two campuses, it's way bigger than that.
Bishop Burkat, I'm in my 17th year of the Gettysburg presidency. I've been trying for 17 years to get a Learjet.
Oh yeah?
I finally have hope that
you'll have a helicopter.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we are able to go where prior generations could not, I talked earlier about this being the 6th or 7th attempt to get these two seminaries together under one umbrella, is technology. So much of the so-called administrative work now can be done using technology. Email, one business office, for example, can serve both campuses. We already have our libraries linked together through the Eastern cluster. So much of this can happen in a in a way that won't be terribly burdensome and won't require, regular, frequent commuting back and forth of.
Well, look at us tonight.
Yeah.
You're in Gettysburg, I'm in Philadelphia, it's working.
Right. A significant number of the classes will be held just this way, where the professor will be in a classroom in Gettysburg one week, tied into the smart classroom in Philadelphia, and then the following week it'll be the opposite, so that the students will get to know face-to-face that professor, but the professor will only have to commute once every 2 weeks.
What about the shuttle?
We're working on all of those logistical things, perhaps a fleet of vehicles, if there's a need for a small van or so, that kind of thing, that could be possible, but also a certain amount of housing on both campuses. So again, if a faculty person has an evening course, they don't have to commute on the train
Right.
back at night. They'll stay overnight at the
No,
other
that-
campus.
And don't forget about our subsidiary company, United Airlines.
There you
They'll-
go.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we wanted to save some money, so we don't want to be adding airfare. All right, so let's just finish with this. This is a nice big future question, which I love the best. What will ULS be celebrating 10 years from now?
Oh, that's a great question.
It is great.
I would say, first of all, I hope 1,000 graduates. I mean, we can't reiterate enough that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is in a leadership crisis. We have 1,000 congregations today that could afford to call a pastor and can't find one. And we have a huge tsunami of retirement, starting with my own the end of June, on the horizon. So we just need so many more people to be presented with the possibility of serving in this wonderful calling that I now have served in for over 40 years. We need more students. We'll be celebrating that we've gotten more students and have hopefully 1,000 or more new graduates 10 years down the road.
So here's my take on the future of the church and how the seminary ties into that. I don't think there's any question that 10 or 15 years from now, the church will be a little smaller than it is now. The demographic trends are just too strong to resist. But if we do our work well now, that smaller group may be more vital, more engaged, and have a greater impact in culture and society. And if we can train leaders to help congregations become places where people come to know their faith and have hope and meaning and be able to share that faith with those around them, then we could see a smaller church that is more vibrant and then begins to grow again. So I think that to be a place that has positioned itself for that kind of leadership and training those kinds of leaders is really exciting. It is a time amidst the challenges in the culture, it is a time that is ripe for renewal. And we want to be training leaders to be at the heart of that.
I'd like to add one more thing that occurred to me while you were speaking. I'd like to see an emphasis in all of our faith communities, whether they be in buildings or in whatever kind of way they would be gathering 10 years from now, because we know it won't always be in buildings, that the people who are the faithful would see themselves at whatever vocation they have as also ambassadors for Christ making God's appeal through us. So I think that if we only concentrate, like we have in so many ways, on just the professional clergy or just as a graduate school, we will have also missed the opportunity of people being ambassadors for Christ. So if the leaders come out seeing that, then that will be contagious for the laity and the kind of witness that we would have, the sparks of light and of enthusiasm and joy in serving. And we know that people are being drawn to the church through service and through worship and through all kinds of ways of learning how to pray, sacramental ministry. There's just so much, there's so many ways that we haven't even begun to stretch ourselves because the institutional church of the 20th century was so prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we take some of that away, okay, not all of it, but some, the opportunities are just remarkable. I think it would be great to just spend a day saying, what will the seminary be? What will theological education be in 10 years, in a decade?
We began this process a year and a half ago with the sense God was calling us to help create and fashion a seminary for the 21st century. And I'm so very encouraged at this juncture. I think it has every potential of meeting the needs of the church for dynamic leaders, of creating diverse communities. It's just been such a privilege to be on this journey and to now soon welcome the one who will serve in our stead and work with you and other board members, with students, faculty, staff, with the broad constituents who support the United Lutheran Seminary.
Well, I think that's the last question that we have, but I want to thank both of you. You've been remarkable presidents, and I'm so grateful that it's come together. I was the one a year ago saying, will we be on time? I have to confess that. So I think it's almost a miracle. We are on time, but I'm seeing that as a sign that we're on the right track, and we'll do everything we can to support the new seminary. And thank you for your courageous and your wise counsel. You took a lot, and we thank you for it. And I thank everyone who visited with us tonight. I'd like to kind of see a list now of who all has joined us. I may know some of you, but thank you for caring so much about the seminary, this new seminary, United Lutheran Seminary, that we've been united tonight. And I hope you've got just a little bit of a flavor or an insight into how we can do this distant kind of learning, bringing people together for the sake of the gospel for generations to come. There'll be a report. What does that mean? There'll be some, I don't know, I'm getting, there'll be some kind of a report on whatever we're talking about. Okay, so I don't know what that means, but I know it's just something I saw.
The webinar has been recorded and will be posted so people can watch it later, I think.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Well, I thank you and I bless you, and it's been a pleasure working with you.
Same here.
Thanks, Bishop.
Good night, everybody.